Welcome once again to the J Lowe Artist YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me on this artistic adventure. Today we'll be working with ink, pen and ink. So have your kneaded eraser, a number 2 or an HB pencil handy, and any type of ink that you would like to use. But make sure that it's archival, that it's permanent, that it's black, and a smooth ink. And let's start doing some ink drawing. By the way, thanks for drawing with me. I love these Pigma Micron pens. They're very smooth, very black, very archival. They stay around for a very long time. We're going to start out with our number 2 pencil and try to get as much proportioning as we can with our number 2 pencil. So the first thing, of course, we're going to do is got to figure out where everything goes. And for this, I love how the edge of the paper kind of relates to the edge of our Bobcat. So I'm just going to kind of come down almost to the middle. If you ever get into advertising, there's a thing called the ideal center or the optical center. It's almost where you divide your picture plane up into halves. And instead of going half, you go a little bit higher than half. So if you're like in magazines or newspapers, that's kind of your optical center is a little higher. This gives you a little bit of visual weight in the bottom. So that's kind of what I want to do. I'm going to kind of look up about halfway and then have that kind of coming up halfway. So there's his head. I'm just going to put a little circle there, and that's hard to see. Let me see if I can tone that down a little bit. Okay, just a very light circle. Remember, we're drawing with the side of our pencil, so that everything here is easily erased. In fact, everything that we draw with the pencil gets erased. So there's that, and then he's got a little triangle for his ears are up in there. Maybe I may want to move him down just a little bit because there's these little tufts of fur that kind of come up off his ear. I kind of want to have those in there. So those will come up and just touch the top edge of my page. So I'm going to just move him down just a little bit. Then his body is kind of like a rectangle. And it's going to come over with his paw kind of sitting right in here somewhere. And again, you just kind of keep drawing until you're happy with it. Don't erase. Because if you erase, then you lose your point of reference. And his little backside kind of comes off his chin right in there somewhere. But that part is, we're not going to worry too much about this. In fact, we can, as we draw it, we can kind of fade out our line this way. What's important here is that his head looks fine. I mean, that's really what we're going to concentrate on there. His eyes are about right in the middle of the circle that we got here. So if I come right to the middle of my circle and I come straight down off my ear, so if this is where my ear is, and I got to move that ear over just a little bit, but if this is where my ear is, his eye's going to be about right in there somewhere. And this one, same thing off this side, his eye's going to be about right in there somewhere. And his nose is about down the bottom of the circle, so I can kind of come down just off of that just a little bit towards the bottom of the circle. Just a little triangle there. In fact, if you wanted to, you could do kind of a little oval for his mouth there like that. And his bottom chin is just another little circular thing right there. Again, we're just trying to get things where they go. We can adjust it from here. Nose is a little long and thin, but again, we can, as we ink draw it even, we can adjust it. We are not stuck with anything here. I'm going to cut off the top part of his eye and just do this kind of a little L shape or a little, and then the circle in there. Same thing on the other side, kind of a little L shape. Almost, it kind of curves. And his little circle that's right there. And often people are like, well, I don't know where the stripes go. If you look at the stripes, they're not symmetrical in that no stripe is the same. but their placement is fairly symmetrical. So you've got like stripes that come off the eye that's right there, another one that comes off of here. Even the ones that kind of come around his nose, you just kind of think, well, they're almost symmetrical as they kind of come around. They are a little different. So if you wanted to, you could put yourself little guidelines to just help you to get those where they go. And you want to draw it fairly quickly, because this is the boring part. It is a necessary part, but it's kind of boring. So then what you want to do is erase anything that is confusing you. Like if there are lines in there and you think, those lines are just confusing me, I don't know where the top of his head is or whatever. You want to kind of get rid of those, but everything else is going to get erased anyway. So don't worry too much about having sharp, perfect lines. Nothing here is perfect. And if you need some more guidelines for this or that, like his little puffs of his hair that comes off his jowls there, you can put those out. Anything that you think, I need something to guide me there, you can do that. So these are just little guidelines that kind of help me figure out where everything is supposed to go. I'm going to put a little guideline in the top for the stripes too, because again, they're kind of symmetrical as well as far as their placement. But everything else can be kind of fudged a little bit. And we got to erase it all anyway. So our steps in drawing is you start out simple shapes, getting the proportions, the size, the placement of it, where you want to go. And you kind of get to decide that. Sometimes you look at your scrap and it kind of helps you. Other times you're like, I want to change it. I want to make it a little different. That's up to you. And also realize that all the drawings that we do together are for practice. You know, nothing here is museum worthy. It's practice. You're learning. That's what it's all about. So once that is finished, and I'm not so concerned about the stripes around here. If you are, you could do some little guidelines there, but they can be off a little bit. This is the head is our emphasis area. That's one of the principles of art. And so we want to make sure that that emphasis area is tight and perfect the way we want it. Everything else we can kind of fudge a little bit. The other thing is that anytime you're doing something that's fuzzy, like a animal, no hard lines around it. A hard line is going to make it look ceramic or heavy. And we want him to look soft and fuzzy. And remember in Art 1, we talked about this, but the lighter, softer, fuzzier you want something to look, the less line you do. You allow your viewer to draw in some things in their mind. So leave things out. When in doubt, leave it out. So I'm going to just start here and with my ink pen here. And I'm going to start with the eye, because the eyes are very important, especially with the big cats. And even though this cat isn't big, he's still considered one of those big cats. So I'm just going to go in and just start little dots and dashes. I can always add more line later. So I'm just going to start out little dots and dashes, looking at the largest areas. I'm going to zoom into his face a little bit, because again, that's the important thing there. And again, we're just using little dots and dashes to create our textures. And if there's an edge you think, oh, I don't see that edge, or I don't want to see that edge, don't put it in. just little dots and dashes. I'll zoom into mine so you can see a little bit easier what I'm doing. Usually the big cats have little dark rings around their eyes anyway, so you can start out with a little dark ring. And if you're a little timid about it, dots and dashes. Just use little dots and dashes. If you draw a line, you're stuck with that line. But if you do a dot and dash, you know, his fur is little dots and dashes. You can always adjust them from there. There is a little highlight in his eye, so I may want to leave some of that out. Here's his pupil. His pupil touches the very top of his eyelid. And so I'm going to start out with this little half circle, and then I just kind of do little lines. You can do little meandering where you kind of just kind of zigzag through it. You can add little dots and dashes. There's lots of different things you can do. And again, you can always come back into it. So when in doubt, leave it out. You can always say, oh, well, it needs to go a little darker. You can come back into it. Not a problem. Sometimes one little dot makes a huge difference. Just very, very thin lines. Also, when you're working with ink, you want to barely press down with your pen. Maybe not even press down. Maybe just let the pen drag across the surface of your paper. That will do a number of things. Number one thing it does is it saves your pen. Number two, it creates a very thin, feathery, soft line. So basically that's the eye. I may come back into it and add a little bit more. And I'm just going to kind of go from that eye and rotate around it and just kind of go pick out all the dark areas. So here's a little dark area around the eye there. And again, we may want to come back into it. You can do cross-hatching. You can do little zigzags. You can do that feathered line where you kind of drop it down and flip it up, and it gives a very thin, feathery line. And dots, dashes. If it's got a little bit of gray to it, just use a couple little thin, dashy lines. If it's really light, just leave it out. You can always come back in if you think it needs to go a little darker. And this is almost like controlled scribbling. The other thing you got to kind of think of is fur on an animal kind of starts from the center of the head and moves out. So as you go, maybe your lines on this side are going to go out this way, and on this side they're going to kind of come out that way. So it's kind of up to you. But just little dots and dashes. Sometimes I call it the coward's way of drawing, in that we just use little feathery lines to begin with because we're not really quite sure. Not that we're cowards, we're just cautious. So this eye on this side is much darker. This one has some light that hits. In fact, he's got reflected light on the inside of his eye. It's probably reflecting from his nose right there onto there. But over here, there's no reflected light. There's a tiny little highlight in his eye. So I may want to put in that pupil the same way I did before, but maybe a little less light to leave out. And if it's a little dimmer or a little darker, you may want to just add some more line to it. Again, just barely touching the surface. That takes some practice. So I know you're going, Mr. Lowe, how do you get those little thin lines? Barely. In fact, I'm not even pushing the paper against the desk. And little dots and dashes, whatever it takes. And because this side is a little darker, I'm just going to hatch through it really quick. And notice we haven't drawn a line around anything. We all too often use too much line when we draw. I'm not exactly sure where we picked that up, but somewhere we picked that up, and maybe as kids we were drawing stick figures or something, and we started using line somewhere. But I mean, we're using line, but it's not a continuous line around our object. You just want to pick out little shapes of dark and light. You get to choose how much of that and what kind of pattern you want to put in there. It's all about the texture. And again, you get to choose that. And I hope you have fun with it. That don't be too serious about it. Have fun with it. Sometimes it's spontaneous. And again, we might need to go back in, and usually you have to go back in and darken things anyway. Because when you first lay them in there, you think, okay, that's enough. And then you get back into it and go, oh, it's not quite enough. So that's usual. Just expect that that's going to happen. And you want to use subliminal lines, edges, to take care of themselves. So even like around his head, instead of drawing line and showing all sorts of things, leave some things out. Like the top of his ear there. You could, if you go into the top of his ear, you can start out with some dark in there, scribble in some dark, and then skip it. Just leave that part out and then bring in that other little part of dark up at the top of his ear, and you can just leave it out. When in doubt, leave it out. Don't be afraid to leave out edges. They're interesting. So any place you see some darkness, just scribble it in. I always get asked about whiskers. How do you draw white whiskers? You don't. You leave them out. So sometimes you can say, well, in fact, here's one thing you can do. You can take your pencil and you can draw in the whiskers with your pencil. And then as you draw, you just leave out where that little space is. And then when you erase it, it'll come out as a white line. And your viewer's eye will follow that line. So rather than draw them in, just leave them out. When in doubt, leave it out. That's our mantra. Here's another little section with that subliminal edge. If you just leave that edge completely out, your viewer understands that. No, they know that it's there. And if you look at it and you go, okay, I need just a little dot or a little dash, Just leave it out. You can see that edge. It makes it softer. And don't be so concerned about putting everything in. So when you're doing fur or hair or anything like that, even if it's human hair, what's important are your outside edges. So when you're doing fur, especially if it's very light and fluffy like this, just do a couple little feathered lines like this, and then leave out the rest. And it just makes it really soft. These are just feathered lines. Some go up, some go down. Don't be all the same direction. The other thing is, if you're in the wrong spot, if you're too narrow or too far out, you can adjust it. If you drew a line there, you'd be stuck with it. Another edge here, his little chin is so light. Just do a couple little lines around it. And everybody understands that's the chin. You don't have to draw a line there. Okay, use that subliminal line to your advantage. Even the top of his head, you just leave it out. Let the stripes take care of themselves. They will define the edge. No reason to tell your viewer everything. That's boring. They want a little mystery as well. And they want to use their imagination. So let them use their imagination. I always feel like I'm just scribbling, and I just go through, and when I'm all done, I'm like, hey, those scribbles look like something. Huh. Crazy. Okay, you guys almost done with his head? One thing you want to do is sometime when you've got enough information there, take your kneaded eraser, get rid of all those sketchy lines. That's going to just clean it up, make it nice and bright, get rid of all that gray sketchy lines. Sometimes you can just add little dots. It's amazing how much value a little dot can give you. Whenever you're doing stripes or things like that in the cats, whether it's a tiger or a leopard or whatever it is, you just kind of go the direction that the fur is flowing, and your lines are just a little closer together. You can kind of do a little zigzag style. What I'm doing here is I'm actually rocking my pen back and forth. So I come down, hit the paper, and then come off the paper, and vice versa like this. That way you don't get little dots where your pen hits the paper. So you're just kind of rocking it back and forth and get long, thin, curved, nice, thin lines. And then you can always come back into it, add a little bit more later too. It's kind of up to you how you want to pick those up. But your line quality is fairly important. How you want to get that line quality in there. If you want it to look like fur, you just have some lines going one way, some lines going another. Again, it's all about the amount of line you have in there. The closer they are together, the more you have, the darker the value. And you got to kind of decide, how dark do I need to go? It's probably easier if you don't go quite as dark as you feel like you need to begin with, because you can always add more later on. And so you just kind of come back in every now and then. I'll look around and go, oh, I need to go a little darker over here, and I'll throw some more up here or there. Some of these little gray areas that are up in his face there, where the fur is very soft and short. Sometimes all you need is a dot or a couple little hatched lines. You can get quite detailed if you want to with your pen and ink, or you can leave it very loose. Kind of up to you, but I think overall you need to kind of start somewhere and then decide what it is you like. And maybe each individual picture you do has its own flavor and its own emotion that goes with it. When you're working on things, you got to kind of stop thinking of it as a thing. It's not a thing. I'm not drawing a cat. I'm drawing shapes of dark and light in a texture, and hopefully that texture will manifest itself in the picture so that when my viewer looks at it, they say, oh, okay, that's a bobcat, or whatever it may be. It's all about communication. What am I communicating to my viewer? This side of his face is a little more in shadow, so if you wanted to, you could just use some very quick line through there. This is kind of a contour kind of a line, and just go back into it until it's as dark as you want it to be. That'll darken in that edge. Sometimes, like this side is very dark, I just kind of scribble through there and not feel too intimidated by anything that's there. Because you got it, the more line you got, the darker it goes. And if it's pretty dark, you just want to keep adding line. Now, I love the contrast that you get from these cat's eyes. They're just so interesting. There is an intelligence, a power, a majesty, and an indifference that they're like indifferent to you. So this little pause is going to go off the page. So I'm just gonna kind of from here on out, I'm just kind of less and less and less line and just kind of fade it out. This is our emphasis area. This is the part you want people to kind of notice and see. So I'm just going to kind of keep that going. And again, just kind of fade it out as you go towards the edge. Even the backside, if you wanted a little bit on the backside, you could do just a little bit of fur, just enough that something like this that you understand. That is his back. And you can add a few little spots here and there. But you really don't need a lot of detail there. Just let it go. Where we're missing the pause anyway, it's probably okay because the head really is the most important thing there. And you don't necessarily want your animal floating either. You don't want him just sitting there. So if you wanted to, you'd add something to the background, some little grass or rocks or whatever it is that you want to have them. Just enough so that you can say, all right, there's something there. You know, he's not just floating. There's some graphite still left in there. I'm going to get rid of that. Like I say, you can take this as far as you want it to go. You can keep adding to it and making it just a little nicer. I tell you what, sometimes drawing is a lesson in patience. Patience not only with your subject matter, but patience with yourself. That you want to get good. You want to be able to do it immediately. You want to be able to draw and do well all the time. But that's just not practical. And it's not how we as humans learn. That's not how we as humans progress and do things. You have to have patience. Thank you for drawing along with me. Thank you for being here and being willing to go out on a limb and draw a little bit. I mean, it's sometimes very difficult to put yourself out there and to do something that you've never done before. I hope you've had an enjoyable time drawing with me today. Hope you've learned something, experienced something. Art makes life better. Have a lovely day.